Helping you lead a healthier life. This is CURES.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness for our mind, body, and spirit. I'm Kara Sundlin. You know, so many of our kids now are struggling with mental health. And often we think about getting a therapist for our child. But what about counseling for the parents, so we actually know how to better respond to our kids? Parent counseling is actually a first line of defense recommended by the CDC and American Academy of Pediatrics for things like ADHD, anxiety, all of it. So joining us now is Dan Weiner. He's a psychotherapist and co-founder of the Family Resource and Development Center in Farmington, with decades and decades of experience of counseling kids and their parents. Welcome, Dan. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, I should also say you're also a dad.
I am. I'm a dad of 3.
Yeah.
They're older. Decades and decades of parenting at this point, too.
But there really is some science behind what we need to do as parents versus a lot of us just parent the way maybe we were parented, or we shoot from the hip. Parent counseling sort of turns it on its head, saying we need some strategies.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We all parent from our personality hip, right? I mean, we were raised a certain way. We tend to apply that, and we apply the lessons we liked. And some of the, we want to go against some of the ways that we didn't like growing up. But, understanding the best way to approach children can be a huge piece to doing a better job. And it can start in early childhood. It's not something that we do a lot of educating of new parents around. And we certainly want parents to embrace better understanding of styles and approaches, and most importantly, understanding the developmental milestones for kids, so they really understand what's coming.
Yeah, sometimes I think we definitely, I've learned from you, maybe expect too much of our kids, like they're little adults, so they should do X, Y, or Z, and that can be a big mistake that we're making.
Should's a rough word to use. It really is. And we get it in our heads that we see other kids doing certain things, and why isn't my child doing the same thing? And I think those expectations are subconscious. I don't think we even realize we're having them a good chunk of the time, but they are influencing the way we approach our kids. We look around, we see certain behaviors that we either don't want to see in our kids or we do want to see, and it sort of pushes us in how we approach our children. And that's always a little tricky. We have to be careful about that stuff.
Yeah, and so let's just go off the bat. There's a couple different parenting styles, or maybe there's even more than a couple, but talk to us about what you know from where you sit and all the science behind maybe the right way or the better strategies.
Yeah, I mean, there's really 4 different styles, ranging from authoritarian to sort of very laid back and casual. And I think we want to really sort of be in that framework of authoritative, sort of setting good limits, but also being good listeners for our kids, and good observers. And I think not just reacting to what we see right off the bat, but really thinking about it and working with them in a constructive way. So
like,
yeah,
firm?
it can vary, and I think different kids' personalities impact how we maybe need to best approach them.
Yeah, so like I have a son who's very strong-willed. He reminds me of my father, but he really doesn't like to be told no. And one of the things that I know you're someone who I'll call sometimes, and if I just do the because I said so, which is often how we were raised, right? And there's not like I don't want to say that, because I said so. But those strategies aren't really strategies. They often don't work.
That's a reaction, not a proactive approach. It really is a reaction. And I think certainly there are kids out there that are pretty flexible and tolerant, and you can get away with that as a parent. You can say it. But I think there are also kids that are more strong-willed, more reactive. They're just, kind of tougher. And it doesn't mean we have to answer them at every turn. But typically when we get a response like, that's not good enough, it typically causes a reaction. So it's not that we can't try it. The issue is when it doesn't work, and the child sort of pushes back, what's our next step? And I think that can sometimes cause problems because our next step is usually emotional, and we don't necessarily want to be highly emotional when we're um, intervening with those types of situations.
Mm. And I know you work with kids who might be struggling with ADHD, who might be struggling with depression, anxiety. And so much of what we hear in the news is let's get our child some mental health counseling if we can. But often the first line of defense for younger kids under the age of 12 is that the parents get help from someone like you. Why is that?
Well, there's nobody who knows the child better than the parents, right? I mean, they spend so much time with their kids, and not only do they have a ton of information about what challenges are going on or what issues are occurring, but we also need to understand how all those challenges and issues have been intervened with up until this point. So we really need to understand what is the parent's reaction to a child's anxiety versus a child's opposition versus a child's mood swings. And oftentimes we can make huge differences in just working with the parents around how they're approaching those particular moments. Um, Therapy is not a bad thing for kids. Obviously, we're big proponents of child therapy, but we do know that the efficacy, the sort of the benefits, come much stronger when we include parents in that process. And like you said, sometimes it is a good first line of defense. Often the children that I see have tried counseling or have been through a different, variety of different supports, whether that's parenting work or child therapy or psychiatric intervention. So, but it is a big part of the work I do, no matter what, is including the parents in that process to a really large extent.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were talking. I have a special report coming up on this on Eyewitness News at 5 this week on Thursday. Depending on when you're watching this recording, it'll be May 23rd, and we can go in depth. And I met one of the moms that you really helped over the years who said, like, she was struggling with anxiety, and she had a kid who didn't want to go to school and was breaking down. And, you think, well, what do you mean your kid doesn't want to school? Just make them go to school. That comes from somebody who hasn't experienced that. But when your child is like, I'm not getting out of the car, or I won't go, because they have so much anxiety, she really realized after working with you, her own anxiety could be a trigger. And when she changed things, she said it was really transformative at home.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. I think that we don't realize how much we're feeding off of our kids' energy and what they're putting out there. And when our kids are anxious or they're resisting things that we know that they're supposed to be doing, it's totally understandable that it would make us anxious. And sometimes anxiety leads to anger.
Mm.
Sometimes it leads to repetitious repeating, of the same statement over and over. Um, General frustration, just lots of different reactions that if we don't understand why we're going there, then we typically repeat the cycle, and that's where we kind of perpetuate the problem.
We all have cycles at home, and I think anyone, if you're a parent watching this, you're thinking, yeah, I can think of the same thing that happens over and over, and I wish it didn't. And then life gets in the way, and we just kind of keep going. So I want to kind of walk it through in a real way. Let's do the morning, which I know in our house can be a little bit of a disaster. I think it's gotten a little better as the kids have gotten older, but like the frustration tolerance is already low, and the kid is really like getting mad and screaming because you're yelling at them to get in the car, and they're yelling that they don't have this or they don't want to go, and then the same thing happens the next day. Everyone calms down, you get to school barely, and then like it just repeats itself. So how do you change that behavior? Because there is some science, and we don't really have to go through the morning meltdown every day. So how would you approach something like that so many people deal with?
Well, there's something to the point that sometimes you do go through it every day, and it's sort of like Groundhog Day. And then eventually you realize, oh my God, we're doing this every day. And that recognition is a big one because it suggests that we have this repeating theme that we're going to have to do something about. And typically those reactions that we're having, we're not planning for, right? We're just sort of, we get up and then we're like, we're not going to go through this again. It's another morning of this. And we're emotionally reacting. And if we're doing that, we can certainly bet our child's doing that. So I think the first piece is we all have to kind of step back and say, we have a problem here. We have an issue that we're going to have to do something about. By doing that, we're kind of turning this reactive process that we go through every morning into something we're going to deal with in a proactive way. That's a really important first step. And whether that includes both parents or one parent, if both parents aren't there, or, that's just whoever the players are, need to really sit down and game plan how they're going to approach the morning differently. So that would invite a conversation. That doesn't mean we're going to say to our child, you do whatever you want, and I'll just be better about my reactions. No, we're really talking about what our expectations are. We're talking to the child about what's making that hard for them, trying to understand what's become, why is it such an issue? Maybe it's the way I'm talking to them. Maybe it's maybe they're having difficulty organizing their time or managing their time. Once we do that, we can then start making a plan in terms of what would look good? What's our success? How would that appear? And by doing that, we can create reinforcement systems like positive rewards for successful mornings, earning things that they may already have access to that frankly maybe they just have too much access to. A big one is gaming or technology. Maybe we need to see some increasing responsibility on their end in the mornings, and that determines whether they get to use that technology later in the day. Every day, every situation can look a little different, but it really starts with the recognition that we have an issue here, and we're not just going to solve it tomorrow morning without doing something first about it.
So let's talk about positive reinforcement. The science is really clear. I learned this in my special report. We have someone who literally wrote the book on something called the Kasdan method, Dr. Alan Kasdan. And in his interview, he was talking about, he's from Yale, and he was talking about, like, we can punish, we can do all we want, but the science is pretty clear, like positive reinforcement. Now, that doesn't mean, a lot of parents are going to bristle at that and say, I have to give my kid a reward for just getting in the car on time. That's not exactly what you mean, right? So how does it look like so that we can make this better and actually change behavior?
Yeah, it is so hard for our generation for many in our generation to accept that like somehow we have to reward kids for doing what we were all expected to do. But I think there are differences, right? Our kids are growing up in very different times. Which I think most of us would agree are more challenging than it was when we were growing up. There's certainly more outside influences that are impacting our kids today. But really what the Kasdan method preaches, and you already know this, but any negative reinforcement really just fuels negative behavior. And if our goal is to reduce negative behavior, then we have to model what we're seeking, which is positive reinforcement, or doing as much ignoring of negative behavior as we can. So no, it doesn't necessarily always translate to a prize. One of the basics is just praising. That is a form of positive reinforcement, is just praise. We tend to, as parents, spend a lot more time pointing out the problem behaviors than we do the positive behaviors. And knowing how much we want to influence things. This isn't promoting just giving them praise for anything. But if it's something that they typically have trouble with and they're trying harder to improve it, that earns praise. That really should be something that we praise kids for. It could be a token reinforcement system, meaning that they have to earn a certain number of marbles or tickets or chips, whatever it may be, to ultimately earn a prize. But the idea is that we're looking to positively reinforce through a variety of different types of rewards that will promote the behavior we're looking for.
Well, and it begs the question, what skill are they missing, which we often forget to think about as parents. Like, come on, just get in the car on time. But for a kid, especially let's say a child has ADHD, they might have a real trouble with time. We forget that they're 12, 14, whatever they are, and you're past the stage of helping them with every step, but they're late every day, and they think, that they in your world, they'd be missing a skill. So you can't make someone do something they don't know how to do. So we have to teach them the skill and then reward them when we're seeing even a little bit of it, like progress, not perfection.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's so funny how we all look back on our youth and we're all thinking that we were so great when we were little kids. But the truth is that none of us really were great with time management when we were 13 or 14. But the expectations that we have for kids has increased so much between sports and activities and all the different things that we need them to do. We're really in a rush all the time environment. And so kids developmentally, and that's why I was speaking before about the need to understand where kids are at developmentally, they don't have those executive functioning skills firmly established to be able to manage the things that we sometimes just expect them to be able to do. So it is about understanding where they're at. And like you said, particularly kids with ADHD, they have more difficulty with those executive functioning skills. Time management, organization, planning, all of those sorts of things can be really difficult. So it's super important that we try to map things out and really catch them being successful as often as we can. That takes time for us as parents to really look at, okay, where have my expectations been? And what would be more reasonable as I move forward? Because we're measuring our approaches as much as we're measuring their responses when we create systems like this.
So in this example of the mornings with parents, you would find some reward they really want, and they'd have to, like, for every time that you're in the car on time, and you have to be really specific about what that was, then you got like a
Right.
point or something. And then is it all bets? I guess what we shouldn't do is when they show up late again the next day, which they might, then it's not like you're a hot mess and you didn't do it and you didn't do it and da 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 da.
That's
You
right.
would
We're not
say,
really
what do you
talking
do?
about it. Right. We're not talking about it as much. We're promoting the fact that we believe they can do a better job the next day. But what I like about what you said is that you were very clear on what the behavioral expectation was. You're going to be in the car, ready to go by a certain time. We want to be pretty explicit in our goals and in what we expect them to meet. We also aren't looking for them, and this is where it becomes a little bit dependent on each child and what they're capable of. But some rewards can be given each day. Some rewards might space out a day or two. We really don't want to do huge long-term rewards. If we're going to do that, we certainly want the token economy to sort of be in there, that token reinforcement system where they're earning a marble or they're earning a chip. And when they get to a certain number of marbles, they'll receive that next piece. But yeah, I think ultimately that's a fine approach. When they aren't successful, we're going to be super frustrated because we're running late, but we've established a plan, and the goal is to just reinforce for success tomorrow.
And then the
Typically, we want
punishment?
to see.
Sorry,
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, the punishment then, like there is a consequence. If you're late, then we're not going to yell about it. But when you get home, you're not having screen time, or however many minutes you're late, you're losing off of your allotted screen time. Or like there is a consequence more than a punishment, I guess.
Well, we can use consequences. What we don't want to do is lecture. We don't want to get into another discussion. And really, the hardest part is when we set those consequences, whether we think, in some cases they're effective and sometimes they're not. But we're not going to add a lecture on top of that. The expectation is that sooner or later they will recognize the importance of this. There may be natural consequences, though. You may not get them to school on time, and they may have to go explain themselves to their teacher. Oftentimes, kids will say, "Can you write me a note?" Well, I think the natural consequence in that case would be, "No, sorry, we're not writing you a note." And then our job as parents is to make sure we don't get into that power struggle at that point where our kid is really pleading with us for that note. And we're just sort of controlling our emotions in that situation and just calmly saying, "I understand, but I can't. I'm sure tomorrow we'll do a better job."
Yeah, that
And
was
just
one of
sort of
the
continuing that theme.
That was one of the things I remember from the interview with the mom. You had given her a line and she just had to remember it. She would even write it down, because when we get all
Yeah.
upset, we have to know what the
Oh,
plan
so
is.
hard.
And it's so easy. I can be a lecturer, I'm a yapper, and I can actually watch. I've gotten better, but my kids' eyes are like glazing over. Like the last thing that I want to hear from me is,
Right.
you got to. They're just like.
Right.
So
Our
when
goal
we're
is for them to
lecturing, we're not
listen to
getting
us.
anywhere.
Yeah, our goal is for them to listen to us. And the more we talk And really what we're doing is we're venting in those situations. It feels good in the moment, but it just doesn't translate to any change. And I think we want our kids to be better listeners. And so the less we talk, when we do have something to say, it'll be meaningful and important for them to listen to.
Yeah, like those old E.F. Hutton commercials, if you're old enough to remember when he talks, everyone
I
listens.
am.
So let's talk about parenting styles between a couple, because one of the biggest things that parents fight about is parenting.
Yeah.
Yeah, they say money and parenting. So what if you and your partner, you and your spouse are not on the same page? And how bad is it if you're not? And what do you do? Because why is it so important to be on the same page?
Yeah. It's really hard. I think even that expectation. So, what does it mean to be on the same page, right? Does that mean we have to agree with each other completely about everything? Or do we need to be on the same page in terms of how we're going to respond to the child? That just requires time and process to explore how we feel, how the partner feels, and really being able to sort of recognize and learn together what's going to work more effectively. So, oftentimes parents are in these places where they feel like their marriage is in great distress, but really what they need is work around their parenting approach. So understanding and having an opportunity to talk about the way they feel and really collaborating together in determining what are our priorities, what are we going to focus on first. Doesn't mean we have to disagree with each other or argue with each other, but these are the areas we're going to focus on first. And I think when parents work together, it makes a huge difference. So it's not so much about being on the same page with everything,
Mm.
right? It's really just about seeing a plan, developing a plan together, and following through on that plan. And sometimes that does take a big part of counseling to make it happen.
Well, and that's what, if this is new to folks, if you go to parental counseling because your kid is really struggling with anxiety or depression or problems with ADHD or anything like that, what does that look like? And how do you help parents?
Yeah. Well, oftentimes it starts with a referral for the child, right? Because a lot of parents don't necessarily know that that's what I'm going to think they need to work on first, or that I'm going to make that a priority. So it starts with me sometimes evaluating the child and then meeting with the parents and really making sure I have a very clear understanding of what's going on through the intake and evaluation process. And then we kind of make a plan together. It takes me being honest and open and explaining where I see certain hurdles as being top priorities for us to target. So it takes a lot of trust. There's a lot of things that go into that process, but it's really important that parents are receptive to what therapists have to say. I think it's fair to say that honestly, with any child, there really should be some element of parenting therapy or parenting counseling that goes along with it. Whether it's going to be as formal as something like the Kasdan method or the SPACE program that's also out of Yale, which is a wonderful program for parents who are struggling managing their child who's anxious. It doesn't always have to be that formal, but it does require that excuse me, that conversation with somebody like us. So then we just make a plan. Once we know, it may be that I'm seeing a child every other week, and on those other weeks, I'm seeing the parents. Um, and it's typically a more concrete approach that we take in terms of, okay, by the end of this block of time, we want to see what differences we've made. What are you noticing that's different about the child? So we can really evaluate how much of an influence that parenting work had on the child's overall
Mm.
struggles.
Well, and so there's actually a plan. Like sometimes you'll give parents homework and it's written. And in the
Absolutely.
instance of like the morning meltdown that then sets off a whole problem for the rest of the day,
Right.
that would be, you would look at that after a couple of weeks and say, is it working? Did he get his reward?
Yeah.
How much on time are we? Are you feeling less stressed? And then you can tweak. But you should, if you're going to parent counseling, the reason you're doing that is not just to vent, you're actually going to see practical results.
Right. And I also think within this, I want to make sure we talk about the hardest part is sometimes the shame that parents feel that they're not able to manage the child's behavior or the child's issues. And I think that's often really scary and overwhelming and embarrassing for parents to talk about. So, I mean, I think that's the other element. You really want to find somebody to work with that's going to gonna empathize with how hard this job is, and that it's okay. We're gonna work through it, and these things can be improved. But there's no need to focus blame and target that kind of stuff. So it's really important that parents just kind of come in with as much confidence and comfort as they can, and it's our job to help them feel that way.
Yeah. And I just want to shout out that you are the co-founder of the Family Development Resource Center. You're in Farmington. You guys actually, I know it's hard for people to find, but you are taking new patients. There might be a little bit of a wait list, but there are therapists there
There's a bit
who
of a
can help
wait.
parents
Yeah,
and
there's
kids
a bit of a
now.
wait, but we're always happy to try to help. And I wish there wasn't a wait list. I wish we had more therapists. But we'll always do the best we can in making that happen. So.
And it's not something like if you're used to going to therapy as an adult where maybe you're just working through emotions, finding yourself or something like that. It might be like talk therapy can go on and on, but this is a little bit different in that there might be a beginning and an end. You're going to have some goals because people worry about, I don't have time for this. But this could be the one thing that helps them actually get back parts of their life. So it might be that you're just going to do 6 or 8 sessions at first, get some progress, and then you might take a break, unlike maybe talk therapies for just emotions.
100%. Yeah, I think every situation's different, but it really is, it's a collaboration with parents to figure out what do we want to accomplish first, and let's see how everybody's feeling after we make some gains in those areas. We may find out that we're not making gains and we have to change course, but it really does have to be a collaborative process for it to be effective.
We have just over a minute left, so I just want to shout out that, again, you have some resources. If you're looking for even, some people are looking for a neuropsych test. You have your own executive functioning testing that you've offered.
Right.
In our minute, if we can't get to you or someone like you, I know the Kasdan method for parenting the defiant child is one book that you really like. Name one more.
Freeing Your Child from Anxiety and OCD, written by Ellie Leibowitz, is probably one of my favorite resources. Ellie is also out of Yale, and what I like about what he and Dr. Kasdan have done is these are longitudinal research studies that sort of come together with very clear approaches for parents. And so we know there's evidence behind these practices that they can make change. And so to me, those are really, really valuable.
Yeah, it's great to know that there's help and there's research that it's helped thousands of other people. So Dan Weiner, psychotherapist, helping us understand it really does start with parents sometimes. So we appreciate you taking your time today to fill us in on what works and what doesn't. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kara.
Thanks, Dan. And everyone out there, you can follow me on @Kara Sundlin, where I share this information. Have a great day and be well.